Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. Brought to you by Blue Sky Business Consulting. We discuss 5 questions in about 15 minutes. Welcome, everyone, to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. I am very excited to welcome our guest today, and she is awesome. In our little pre-discussion, getting to know each other, she's got some great insights, so I'm excited for you to learn from her. This is Radhika Dutt, and she is from Lexington, Massachusetts, and she is an author and has released a book called Radical Product Thinking, and also has another book in the works. So Radhika, tell us a little bit more about these projects you're working on.
Well, Radical Product Thinking came out in 2021, and that book was about how do we build transformative products, like game-changing products, while avoiding product diseases. And examples of product diseases would be things like pivotitis or obsessive sales disorder, strategic swelling. These are things that I think most of our listeners are going to recognize and go like, oh, I want to know more.
I've heard that, yeah.
So that's Radical Product Thinking. My next book project is what I'm working on now. I'm working on writing it now, and it'll be out in about a year from now, so late 2026. It's about why goals and OKRs, or objectives and key results, but why goal setting doesn't work well, why it backfires, and what works instead.
Well, I can't wait to read it, because that's something that I often struggle with. I'll set a goal, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work out, and then a variety of things can happen, both good and bad. So I'm sure there'll be some great things coming out of that. So congratulations on your previous book, as well as the new project. I'm excited about it. So thank you very much. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with our questions now. Radhika, sometimes in a team environment, the energy levels will kind of drop a little bit. What can leaders do to reinfuse energy into their team?
One thing that I've found to work really well is framing things as puzzles, right? Imagine I say to you, Sean, what are your goals for this year? Versus I ask you, Sean, what puzzles would you like to solve in our business this year? Right? The latter just makes you excited. And so my point is, for high performers, puzzle setting and puzzle solving is like catnip. Whereas what gets demoralizing sometimes is a lot of the performance theater around goals and targets. When you set a goal or a target for your team, very often it feels like, I want to show you metrics to say, ta-da, I've hit my goal, right? And if I can't show you that, it's actually quite demoralizing. I feel like, I failed you, but just there's not much I can do. I'm trying really hard, but whatever I tried didn't work. And in the end, I'm showing you a really bad report card. It's kind of how one feels about it, right?
Yeah.
And instead, what you really want is not just report cards, not just studying to the test. As a leader, you don't just want people to show you metrics you hope to see. You want the real scoop. And so that's where, when you frame it as a puzzle and work on the puzzle solving details, and you get the real scoop, that's how you make real progress. And that's how it energizes your team. That's the catnip your team needs.
I love that. And that's a very unique approach. And I felt the energy when you asked me those questions. You're like, what are your goals? Okay, well, I'd like to do this, this, and that. But then you said, what puzzles are you trying to solve? And immediately the creative part of my mind, which I am a puzzle solver naturally, so I immediately engage with that. But I think you're right, Radhika. There's a lot of people that will connect better with a puzzle solving approach rather than just setting a goal and calling it that. That's fascinating. I love that. All right. Question number 2. How can leaders promote learning within the company or a team?
Yeah. One thing that I found to work really well is learning by itself is hard when you don't have scaffolding.
Mm,
How do you do the learning right? Because a lot of people I hear, they say, well, encourage failure, etc. But yes, how do you encourage failure? Even the word failure sounds scary.
right,
So,
right.
how do you create the scaffolding for learning? And this goes to the framework I talk about that I'm working on publishing in this new book. It's called OHLs, Objectives, Hypotheses, and Learnings. And the puzzle solving part is the hypothesis and learnings part. That forms the scaffolding for learning. So let me explain what I mean by this puzzle solving and the scaffolding for learning. When you have a goal or a target, you're asking your team, have you or haven't you hit this target? Instead, if I frame it as puzzle solving, I ask 3 questions. So the first question is, how well did it work? Right? It's not did you or didn't you hit this goal? It's not binary. It's how well did it work? And this is where I define a hypothesis that if I try this experiment, here's what I expect, because here's this connection between what I expect and the experiment. Right? So this is the hypothesis. And then I frame leading and lagging indicators so that I can measure what's working, how well it's working. So this way, by framing the hypothesis, leading and lagging indicators, I've defined this part of how well is it working? Like, what is the how well and it working, right? So that's the first question. How well is it working? The second question is, what have you learned? And in this case, I tell my team, don't just spit out statistics at me. Don't just tell me, here's the weekly number of active users, here's the time spent on site, bounce rate, blah, blah, churn. That's all a bunch of stats. Take the stats, you digest it, you do the work of digesting it, and you tell me, what have you learned from it? And by the way, this goes back to your point of this creative brain that you trigger, right? By saying, tell me the story, the narrative in terms of what have you learned. And then comes the third question, which is based on how well it worked and what you've learned, what will you do next? Meaning, if I were to give you a magic wand, what will you ask for, right? And so this is the kind of scaffolding we need for learning. You know, you often hear leaders say, don't just come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. But what happens then is very often you hear people not bringing out the problems because they don't yet have a solution.
Yeah.
So when you frame it in this way, the 3 questions, how well did it work? What have you learned? What will you try next? You're making it more open. You're allowing for collaborative problem solving. And by doing that, you're creating space for learning. Have your team present this information to you in monthly business reviews. Have them present information about features or initiatives in this format. And, you can use this yourself as a leader to present information to others saying, we tried this initiative. Here's how well it worked. Here's what we learned. Here's what we're going to do next. And you'll see that others absorb this and start to use this for learning.
Oh, I really like that because you're right. So many times leaders will say, don't bring the problems, don't bring the solutions, as you mentioned. And yet they don't create either the environment or the structure, the scaffolding as you talked about. That's what leaders need to do. If they're going to be that type of leader that says, don't bring all don't just complain, but help us solve the problem. You've got to create the environment in which they can solve the problem. I love that structure that you talked about, those 3 questions. Very valuable information. Okay, question number 3. What's one tip that you have for effective delegation?
Yeah, delegation is something that, we make it seem like, oh, come on, it's easy to delegate. As a leader, just delegate, right?
Right.
But I want to first start with empathy for leaders. Why is it so hard to delegate? Because you don't always know that your team has the ability to just take it and run with it, right? You have people of varying levels of skills and competencies. And so, as a leader, how do you delegate? It's not one standard, here's your tip. Here's, go forth and delegate in this way, right? Because what matters is how much competency does this person or this team have? That determines what you can or can't delegate. So here's the trick in terms of delegating. When you have the scaffolding of how well did it work? What have you learned? What are you going to do next? It's a way of being able to delegate and knowing how much scaffolding and help does your team actually need. Right. So for someone or for a team that is extremely competent, that, is able to take this and they're able to run with it. They run experiments. They tell you what they've learned, what they're going to do next. And you can see the depth of their thinking and you go like, okay, I have confidence. I get how they can take my delegation. You're able to let them go, give them bigger and bigger puzzles to solve and set them off on solving these puzzles, right? Whereas in teams where you don't have this level of competence, this framework gives you scaffolding. It helps you know how much hand-holding do I need to do. So it's not just a tip for delegation, but rather it's a tip for delegation and knowing how you can handhold different teams with different levels of competencies so that you can build skills and delegate increasingly over time. But it's not sort of like throwing people off into the deep end and sink or swim.
Right. Oh, wow. Such great information, Radhika. This is awesome. All right. Question number 4, and I'm very excited to hear your response to this question. How can leaders effectively communicate the values and purpose and mission and so forth to their team or their employees or whatever the case may be? That communication effort is kind of what is sometimes lacking. How can leaders effectively communicate those important principles?
I love this question because I think to this as well, I've heard a lot of trite answers like, well, of course, set a good vision. And um, there are lots of resources out there that tell you, your vision has to be grand, a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And here's what I'll say. I found that most of that is actually not useful. Even Simon Sinek's Start with Why. You know, yes, sounds great, but I've seen teams go into offsites, use the day to start with why, and they're sort of in the same place where they started at the beginning of the day,
Right.
um, because you get stuck in wordsmithing. So here is something that I wrote about in Radical Product Thinking in terms of what does it mean to have a detailed vision? And it means you have to define a clear problem statement. Stop thinking that, a good vision is something like being the leader in blah, blah. Boeing's vision, for example, is to be the enduring global champion in aerospace or something like that. But honestly, what does that even mean, right? Is it about market share? Is it revenues? Is it shareholder returns? Like, it is not clear, and you've seen Boeing lose its way. So, what is a good vision instead? In the radical product thinking way, you write a radical vision statement. And it means filling out a fill in the blank statement that defines whose problem are we solving? What exactly is their problem and how are they solving it today? Why is this unacceptable? Meaning, why must we change the status quo? And if we cannot answer that in enough detail, we have no reason to build a product. When we answer this why, then we can say, here's the world we envision. And then finally, this is finally where you get to talk about your product. How will you bring it about with your product? So I'll give you an example of a radical vision statement using a startup that I founded in 2011, sold in 2014. Here's how the vision goes. Today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they're likely to like or learn about wine, they have to find attractive looking wine labels or find wines that are on sale. This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments, and it's hard to learn about wine in this way. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We're bringing about this world through a recommendations algorithm that matches wines to your taste and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. This is a radical vision because I didn't tell you anything about my startup, but I described the problem statement, why we needed to solve it, and the end state, and you hopefully knew exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. And this is the level of vision that you need for your team and how you can communicate it.
Oh, wow. That's great information, Radhika. You have a very distinct way of helping people clarify it and be able to go forward in what I believe to be very actionable steps. I really like that. Love your approach. All right. Question number 5, the fun question to kind of wrap up our podcast. Tell us a little bit about your first job.
um, I'll tell you about the first job in the startup that I had. So this was when I was still at MIT. We were in our dorm rooms and we started a company. It was called Lobby 7. And our vision was revolutionizing wireless. So if you ask me right now, 25 years later, what this meant, I still don't know. But our idea was revolutionizing wireless.
Okay.
And the one thing I'll say is we'd caught the disease that I now call hero syndrome, which means you're all about going big, it's about scaling, etc., but without this clarity of what is the problem you're really setting out to solve, right? And so coming back to everything that I'd said, when you have this shared clear vision, like what I described, a lot of this comes from the hard lessons from my career. What we needed was this sort of clarity and vision. And then to achieve that vision, we needed to really have this puzzle setting and puzzle solving approach and energize our team in terms of like, what's the puzzle, have learning along the way, align on those learnings and keep making progress towards that vision. So everything that you're hearing in terms of my radical product thinking book, as well as my upcoming project on why goals and OKRs don't work, I guess that sums it up. It goes all the way back to my first startup and then a lot of hard lessons since.
Well, what I love about that is that it's becoming very obvious to me that this is not the books that you're writing and the principles that you're trying to teach are not just principles and theories. You've actually experienced them. You've gone through the process and you've learned for yourself. And now you're backing it up with research and whatnot, but now you're taking it to the world. I love that. Radhika, this has been so much fun. I've really enjoyed learning and talking about leadership and teams with you today. Thank you for taking of your very precious time to come spend some time with us here on the Team Engagement Podcast. How can people find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, first of all. I love hearing from people and how they're creating change. So please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. You can also download the free OHLs template that I talked about for puzzle setting and puzzle solving. So if you go to radicalproduct.com, you'll see toolkits and the OHL templates is there. And I'm happy to share a link with you so that you can share this with listeners afterwards, Sean. And then lastly, people can also get the Radical Product Thinking book. It's wherever books are sold, and you can look out for the next book, which is temporary. The working title is Escaping the Performance Trap: Why Goals and OKRs Backfire, and What to Do Instead.
Oh, I like it. That's awesome. And yes, please do include that link because we'll include it in the show notes and some of the other places where we'll make sure that you are very visible. And yes, we definitely need to reconnect again when your next book comes out, Radhika. So let's make sure we get that taken care of. But thank you again for being on the podcast today. And thanks to all of you who are watching or listening. And we hope that you are subscribing or joining us every week as we continue to talk and explore different concepts and ideas behind leadership. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and have a great day. This is Sean Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, go to teamengagementpodcast.com. We also invite you to follow or subscribe to our podcast wherever you may be listening or watching. Is your business thriving? Go to tbs-score.com to find out. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.